Former President Donald Trump is getting ready to face a judge inside a courtroom in Miami today for his arraignment on dozens of felony charges related to his alleged mishandling of classified documents. This is a truly historic day because it is the first time the Department of Justice has ever charged a former president with a crime. Saint Anselm College political professor Christopher Galdieri joins us to talk about the numbers underlying former President Trump's support. And thanks so much for speaking with us today. What does this indictment mean for the GOP race, especially since the frontrunner, former President Trump, is facing these felony charges?
Well, I think this indictment gives Trump a chance to double down amongst his hardest core of supporters. Essentially, what I think you're seeing from Trump is he is using this indictment to lean in to his sort of style of grievance politics, of the idea of himself, not just as a victim, but as a stand-in for his supporters who themselves feel aggrieved by economic change, demographic change, cultural change in the United States. I think where this indictment is also affecting Trump is that there's also, a small but notable number of Republicans who are concerned by these charges, who think that he should not run if he is convicted and that sort of thing. It's a small group, but I think it's a meaningful one, and I think it could cause headaches for Trump down the line.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. There is the core base who will always support him. There are people who will never vote for him. And then there is that group that might say, previous charges and indictments didn't affect the number of his supporters, but now some might move away from him as this case unfolds, do you think, to Ron DeSantis or some other candidate?
Yeah, I do think there is a possibility for that. The previous indictment in New York, it's not that it's not a serious charge, but it's also a very arcane legal theory. It's about fundamentally Trump trying to cover up an affair. I think a lot of voters might be inclined to dismiss that as a personal matter that might not necessarily be the sort of thing the courts should be involved with. Here, we're talking about national intelligence information. We're talking about national security. And so I think, you don't necessarily should be expecting a large number of Republicans to run away from Trump over this. But I do think it's possible that as this goes on, there will be some Republicans who take a second look and think, maybe it's time for somebody else. I think the problem for the other candidates who aren't Trump is that number is probably not going to be enough to take the nomination away from Trump next year.
I'm curious, in looking at the poll numbers that you've seen or the surveys, do you think at this point, President Trump aside, does Ron DeSantis have the next largest amount of support, and can he sustain it moving forward?
Yeah, we've seen most surveys have shown Trump in first place, DeSantis in second, usually a fairly distant second at this point. I think, DeSantis could have some room to grow, especially if Trump starts to falter here. But the problem for DeSantis is that he seems really unwilling to attack Trump over this. I mean, think about that for a second. Usually you think my opponent's been indicted. I'm going to use this. I'm going to criticize him for this. Instead, what you see is that most of the leading Republican candidates have closed ranks behind Trump. They've said, well, this is a terrible prosecution. It's a weaponization of government and all the rest of it. And that's really no way to win a primary. The only way to beat Trump is to beat Trump. And I think too many Republican candidates are going into this contest with the attitude that, well, somebody else will do it. Somebody else will take care of Trump. Somebody else will criticize him. Somebody else will attack him or convict him or something. But we don't have to do it. And I think you're just seeing the problem Republicans have had for the last 8 years all over again. Republicans, by and large, aren't willing to attack this guy, even though he's now been indicted twice and likely has a couple more coming down the pike this year.
Yeah, it seems that former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie sees that as his opening, right? That's going to be his lane. He's going to attack former President Trump directly. He just needs to get at least 40,000 donors, right, to get on the debate stage. Is that the next big hurdle? That if someone's going to go after former President Trump, they've got to be standing there, and he has to agree to debate.
Right. That's the thing. Christie really seems to be staking a lot of his campaign on the opportunity to be on a debate with Christie. But as you said, getting 40,000 donors is a lot. That's a huge undertaking, particularly for a candidate like Christie, who doesn't have a ton of staff and doesn't have a ton of resources. If you think back to 2020, we saw a lot of the, sort of middle tier Democrats like Cory Booker and Kirsten Gillibrand really struggle to meet those donor requirements. And then, as you said, there's no guarantee that Trump will show up for a debate. We've seen a number of cases in 2015 and 2016. He just skipped debates or he skipped candidate forums. And what happened? Everybody spent the forum or spent the debate basically talking about Trump. So he might look at this and say, there's no percentage of me showing up for a debate for Chris Christie to yell at me if I stay away. He will be, yelling about me to basically nobody.
Right. And it is interesting, New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, when he announced that he decided not to run, said that these other Republicans, if you either go after the former president or you shouldn't be in the race because you're just going to take votes away. It's going to divide the field. We use the word unprecedented an awful lot in the last couple of years. But in previous presidential primaries, has there ever been a situation like this where there was one political leader so strong, even his own opponents didn't want to take him on? I mean, he really kind of stands alone in this.
Yeah, it's really tough thinking back to think of an example, even in cases where, some figure from the establishment of the party, Bob Dole in 96 or Walter Mondale in 1984, they still faced really spirited challenges. They faced strong opposition from other people in their party. It's really tough to remember a case where the party out of power had a candidate who had this much support this early, and that support just seemed to be really strong. This isn't a case of simply everybody saying Trump because they've heard his name before. I think, we're talking about serious, dedicated support in amongst the Republican primary electorate here.
Right. One last question, then I'll let you go. When he is arraigned on these felony charges this afternoon, it's one thing in theory, but to see it in reality, apparently there isn't going to be a mugshot. But do you think when he actually does appear in court, and this seems to be moving forward, that will affect his standing moving forward, even among the base?
I think that's not likely to happen anytime soon. And again, I think that's simply because until and unless his opponents and other Republican leaders really start criticizing Trump over this, I think the message most Republican primary voters are going to be getting is either Trump's message that this is an unfair prosecution or an echo of it. How dare they do this to Donald Trump? I think it will take a concerted effort by his opponents and by other Republican leading figures to actually criticize Trump over this. Until that happens, I think Trump will remain basically where he is in primary polling.
Professor Christopher Galdieri, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me. I appreciate it.